get ready for it, it's just not a priority.
We're dropping out people
We're,
because of the
yeah,
process.
because of the process.
So
And
how do we
And that's
go
why
there?
I wanted to make just 3 points
Okay.
really quick.
You wanna get to it?
Get to those points along those lines. In every other aspect, groups partner with 501c3s and everything except for the voting process. Why can't we somehow partner with the group to make it easier for people to be prepared to vote? And this is just food for thought.
We're
Okay.
initiating that, I think.
And then number 2, Chris and I have had this conversation, it's been over a year. What does Lancaster do? They have a vote by mail, right? I mean, that you can actually.
Well, Oregon, all their voting is by mail.
All right, so I spoke to Chris about this because this was something I personally wanted to take on. But Chris informed me that we have to have someone in the legislature that has to carry this bill for Douglas County, right?
We expect you.
That's a wrong number.
That someone needs to carry this bill, and we were figuring out, remember that conversation?
yeah.
We were figuring out who would be willing to write legislation and back it up so that Douglas County can have the same.
The Oregon system, I know my colleagues from Oregon, they love it there. I mean, there's more participation because it's
Okay,
easier
and I
to do
can
it.
back that up
Yeah.
with, I work door to door for the minimum wage, all right, walk door to door. And I ran out of forms where
Yes.
people wanted to vote by mail.
Yes.
I mean, in the Hispanic, we're talking just Hispanic. So there is potential.
Yes.
By risk.
That's something that's on the radar now for the first time. This time last year, it was not on our radar. We didn't think we were close to that. We're up to 30% mail-in ballots right now.
Right.
And August, we're going to send out to every voter in the county a card telling them where their polling place is, how they're registered, where they're registered, and a tear-off reply card requesting a mail-in ballot. So they can request.
When's the first date that you can do it? Mail in.
You can, that started in July.
July 1st.
You can mail in your ballot. and
Well,
you-
mail in
Without
request.
request.
You can
Yeah.
have
Then you
requests.
get your ballot, and what is the time frame?
First week in October.
They have a month or so to.
Right.
And then they can request the ballot right up until the day before the election. It's getting it back to them in the mail.
But if we can add to that, can they do ads, they meaning this group, do ads to say, go to your urban league, go to One World, get that mail by,
Why can you not do that?
Well, that's
We do.
part of what we're
We do
doing is
that.
we're working with the league, we're working with,
ads that-
No, I mean real ads. I mean, you-
Real
public
ads.
service announcement.
Oh.
Right, right.
I just sent out
We
an
did
email
early
this
ballot
morning,
application.
trying to set up a next meeting
Yeah.
for us to get together. Just so that, because there's what we can and can't do
Right.
as a government body. but
Exactly.
we would
I think that's
like-
pretty amazing that you've gotten to 30%.
Right, and
Yeah.
the early ballot application is published in Sarpy County and all the small county
Right,
papers.
right.
So there's an actual application that is put into the papers as an advertisement.
If I may, first of all, big kudos to Douglas
Yes.
County. This card that they're sending out is bigger than it sounds. In our community, because of the previous election commission, they closed polls, the voter completely confused, they don't have confidence in the system. And we've been fighting to get just basically, here's where you vote. They're doing that, and then they're piggybacking the early voting application form and all of that. That's good stuff.
We're partnering with Survey, we're
Yeah,
both doing
great,
it at the
great.
same
Sarpy,
time.
we did it in 2010 also.
Yeah, I want to comment on your question as to, you really asking what some of the problems. And I wanted to say that, as we see it, we're very high on early voting. And it is increasing turnout in our community. Even now, the seniors who didn't want anything to do with it, they want to go in the poll, they're not changing. But my point is this, that as much as I am for it, there's a part of me that's scared of Oregon, and Colorado does a lot of it, where everybody gets early voting, because then you begin to lose control of the process. Now, we're happy with what you do, but what you have the potential of when you're dealing with early voting is a lot of people handling pieces of paper that can be thrown in the waste basket or whatever. There's a lot of chance.
Potential for fraud. One of the things that you also don't get think I voted every election, but I think for me, it's going to see your neighbor.
Yeah.
I mean, that to me is the best part of voting almost. I mean, the voting's fun, but I mean, to be able to go and take your kids or whatever, I mean, it becomes almost like,
That's
it's a
the,
celebratory
Yeah.
sort of thing.
Yeah.
that's the razor's edge we're on, is that at what point do we leave the polls open, and at what point do we go all mail?
Yeah.
If we get to 50%, I mean, we'll have 1,800 people working November 8th. Just working at the polls, not the 60 in our office. If we go all mail, we'll add more staff. We're not gonna save that much money, because it's gonna
Right.
take that many more.
So maybe it
internal
just is not
people
that
to
great
do
of
it.
an idea.
But the issue, especially after 2012, is if we close the polls to do all mail, then what does that do to
Yeah,
the people? who
that's,
can't-
I'm a little scared of it myself.
Yeah, it's gonna be a big process.
I don't see it, I look at it like, for example, when, ordering through Amazon and all this, eBay, the retailers are like, it's another way to be able to serve that person who can't get off of work.
Well, there's that voting on Tuesday
Okay,
thing as
but-
opposed to Sunday, which
Right,
has always
and
been
then the
something.
other part of it is this, I find it rather unfortunate that it always comes down to whether or not we want to, appropriate the funds to facilitate the process. That discussion has to change.
Yeah.
This is a central component of living in a democratic society, and the fact that we even have to have this discussion about whether or not our county government can afford to do this is ridiculous.
Right.
Because at the end of the day, what it does, it undermines the entire essence of what the Constitution's about, of being able to provide people with the voice to vote. But if we don't want to appropriate the funds to it, then it becomes a decision whether or not to keep the polls open or to, cover the mail-in. Why is that even a discussion? And I think that's something that our elected officials really have to kind of continue to remind their colleagues, in whatever legislative house they're in, that, so we're willing to place a premium on that element of who we are as a society. Like I said, that's ridiculous. We shouldn't even have to have this conversation. And I really find it to be really, it's really a sad commentary if that's really what our society is gonna base itself on in terms of how we govern.
Going back to kind of the demystifying the process, we've been talking a lot with Oregon. They do actually, so like the NCOA where they match, who's done national change of address form with what the current voter rolls are. Our Secretary of State only can really afford to do that 2 times a year. That's because he has to buy the entire list. Oregon does it on a monthly basis. Then of course the counties are nice enough to send out the confirmation cards, which is another opportunity to kind of touch a voter and help them
Yes.
re-register. So one, investing to be able to do that more frequently. So that's why it's so great you're sending out in August,
Yes.
because that's another opportunity. You're gonna get mail back.
Yes.
You're gonna know who moved. You're gonna be able to have it forwarded and find them.
That's the downside of it too, is
Yeah.
we're going to potentially
Purge.
have a lot of people who are gonna have to jump another hurdle on election day
Yeah.
if they didn't respond to that, right?
So-
And the post office isn't perfect either.
Yeah, and so investing kind of another opportunity, but I mean, online voter registration was another great step in the right direction. It's a new way that they can do it. It's another way to touch the younger demographic. But I feel like there's also some statutes on the books that aren't being utilized. One of them is the early voting location, where outside of just the election commissioner, they can set up an early voting site off-site. The
Absolutely.
problem is that we've had a really bad kind of toxic relationship, in that in Lancaster, Dave Sharkey wasn't gonna do it, he was gonna set it up in libraries, except for the one downtown, which then the Democratic Party kind of made a big hullabaloo about, and so then they just said, no, I'm not gonna touch it then. So we're having kind of a bad partisan toxic
You have
relationship
the
where.
drop-off sites like we do here?
We have drop this, no, it was like an early voting site, it's essentially like a
I know,
satellite.
but do you have?
The problem we run
Yeah.
into with that is the number of ballots we have.
Yeah.
We have 213 precincts, 300 and some different
Yeah.
ballot phases in the state of Nebraska, or in the county, in Douglas County alone. So do we put all of those in every satellite? That's the problem with the satellite is.
There's, I mean, obviously, we
Yeah.
can both on top of that, but it's just unfortunate that we don't even get to that discussion because no one wants to.
One of the other things about going to an all-mail, mail-in election is the research I've seen is showing that there's a steep hike in the beginning of it it plateaus, and then it falls off a little, and they don't know how far it's gonna fall, they haven't been doing it that long.
That's interesting. It's been,
Yes.
Because it's a new exciting thing, and they know I've done that, and then it sits on the coffee table.
let me, I mean, I know that parliamentary elections are different, and we're, most countries of the world have parliamentary elections, and, the prime minister, as we saw in Britain, there wasn't a national election, but at least a change in leadership. But there could be an election called, and within the 5 years in England. And then the election, I think it's 6 weeks, is it 6 weeks in England? And they have, I believe, not much higher, but they have significantly higher turnout. To the earlier question, the point about the press and about the intense, I mean, I keep getting asked on my travels about the United States and about the election. Obviously, everybody's kind of focused on the presidential election, but right now, how can you get elected and then you start running for election the day after you're elected? I know in my case, I think my opponent said he was gonna challenge me because we needed a change a week after I didn't even have my,
You haven't been in?
I didn't have my apartment yet. But basically, I think, and that's politics, and that's all fair, but I think that, is there something around that process, whether, the 2-year congressional cycle where you have to start running right away, or the presidential cycle?
I think it's voter fatigue, I'm gonna be honest with you. I mean, the election campaign for president starts 18 months prior to the election.
Yeah, or more even before.
Or even more,
Usually the legislative candidates start.
the day after the elected.
Yeah.
And so we're in perpetual campaign.
And that's why I think our municipal elections are victim of that. Right after the presidential election, bam.
Should we do that though? Should we think about, should we put some sort of, what's the word, around, some sort of way of protecting the election process and make it restrain the time when campaigns can be conducted? Would that help?
Well,
I don't know, I wonder that certainly that's.
I see another solution, but I haven't thought it through, but surely using the municipal election. Right after the presidential, everybody take a deep breath, and then bam, we've got the mayor and city council, and they're sitting out there all by themselves, that's all there is.
That should be the same cycle, shouldn't
Yeah,
it?
it should be in some cycle other than that.
Well, I mean,
That's
how much
why-
money do you have to spend to run a mayoral election separate?
300,000 or something?
Yeah.
And how much would it save
For the
you
recall.
to put it in?
Yeah.
300,000.
But the savings is, that's one aspect of the total picture that, there's not on, go ahead.
Well,
Make it
yours
work.
is in the same cycle, right? In the Bellevue City Council is in the same cycle as the kind of
Right.
even every year, yeah.
Mhm.
But in Omaha, it isn't, so I mean, it is.
No.
They have
If-
actually, Sarpy County gets a year off, kind of,
Yeah.
we do, but Douglas doesn't.
We
at
get
all.
every third,
Yeah.
1 out of 4 years off.
Yeah.
which is
But
last
every
year
other
for
year,
us.
we do have.
Off is
kind
sort of a
Off-
broad way to say it.
Off
Right.
means that you only have to do the SID elections, which
Right.
only take hiring
Which
20
gives
temps.
you time, which gives you time in your office to get geared up for the next election.
And to think about innovations and,
Right, and to get out to
and
the
to clean up.
public, and to clean up.
Clean up your voter files, clean up, we do a lot of mailings to
Right.
make sure that, everyone we have registered, anyone we have a question about.
Currently, we're going through the petitions when we find out that we have a change of address. And we're already trying to contact those people to say, hey, we have an upcoming election, we show by you signing this petition, you have a change of address.
You gotta come in.
You need to fill this form out, we're actually sending a voter
Or send
registration
it out,
form to
yeah.
them, and saying, you need to fill this out, get it back to us so that we can get your proper address and tell you where to properly vote for the upcoming election. So, we're working with the public the current voters on the registration rolls.
That's great.
I'm asked, I can't speak for your organization, but I'm surprised you haven't mentioned it so far, but there are some great recommendations in your translation of the presidential commission on this subject as it relates to Nebraska, and for the record, many of those could be almost followed if you're looking for what kind of legislation would make sense. You guys have done a tremendous job of articulating that in that document.
On the federal side, I think where the conversation is about this this dark money in this Citizens United case, and not just Citizens United, but cases that ran up to Citizens United that sort of predicted that there would be a Citizens United First Amendment kind of applying the First Amendment to political contributions and so forth and so on. So I don't know if it was inevitable to get to Citizens United, but it was, you could see the pattern of where the court was going to get to Citizens United. So I mean, you have a series, well, you have a court rule, so to say, that says, a court-made law that says, you know, you can create these organizations, you don't have to identify who the donors are, and that money can be spent pretty much at any time in any kind of election cycle, at a time when it's very clearly sensitive to the outcome of the election, and nobody out there knows where this money came from. There's some innocuous name given to the organization, like, you know, Americans for Freedom or whatever they're called, and that really does confuse the voter, and so we're worried about that. The other thing, I think, in the Congress, again, the Sarbanes bill, which treats everybody somewhat the same. I mean, if we're going to have contributions that are dark, then why can't somebody who makes a very visible contribution, shouldn't that person be encouraged to do that? And that to me seems logical. And then just work more and more on the voter registration area for national elections. And then gerrymandering. I mean, what's happened is there are about 56 real contested seats in the United States Congress. When I first worked in Washington, which was in the last century, some while into the middle of the last century, isn't it funny how you think about centuries? If you were born around the Civil War, the 1916 was a long ways from that. And you translate that to the day, and you go, oh my God, I worked in Washington in the late 60s. But you know, in those days, those seats were open. Those seats were contested. And now what happens is the parties, you now called cantorize somebody. Eric Cantor voted for the stimulus bill, therefore he, you know, maybe he was more than that, but he lost the most powerful members of the House. He lost his election, and a very bright guy, and then once he lost that election, the winner of that election was guaranteed the victory in the general election, and that's the case on both sides of the aisle. So how do you get I think the power of our unicameral from my 16 years there is it draws people to the center. The way the process works draws people to the center, and whether it's not having partisan caucuses where you can get everybody revved up and that kind of thing, to how you select committee chairs, however it is, my experience is you tend to get a very bipartisan leadership, and it tends to move to the middle. That's not what's happening in Congress. The parties seem to be pulling apart the people. So I don't know if there's something in the election laws, certainly the gerrymandering.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there's got to be efforts to get these districts. I had, and I'll shut up, I had dinner with Joe Manchin, who I've come to like, from West Virginia, and he said there are three things I would change. He said, number one is our priorities need to be first the country, second our constituents, and third our parties. And we've become so highly partisan, and in an ironic way, partisan at a time when parties are somewhat losing their power to dark money.
Well, I would add to the part of the problem that has come up over the last 25 years in this area has been that we've allowed for the gerrymandering to really fracture communities, and that's the bottom line. We're not getting a true representation of what the constituents want. It's what the politicians want. This has helped to turn the voters off.
So we draw lines with
computers. We can do computers and bipartisan commissions. State next door to us is, you know, going that route. A lot of other states are going in that particular route. I think you're going to get a fair distribution of what the communities want. You may have Republican communities, you may have Democratic communities, you might have a Libertarian community. I think that would be healthy for the democracy. So my recommendation is in the next cycle, as we begin the process, and I know all the states are responsible for the reapportionment.
We can set the course, though.
The federal government needs to set the course so that we have a fair representation. It's not just all about getting my party to win, because at the end of the day, guess what? That's backfired on the Republican Party. I tried to tell some of my Republican friends and colleagues that you're gonna get what you're asking for, and so we want people that have no experience whatsoever in government, no ability to, it's one thing to get elected, it's another thing to govern.
Yeah.
That is the harder task.
Well, so
of the
gerrymandering
process.
is gerrymandering, or the idea of drawing districts, what that gerrymandering really means is that, is that you're getting political decision-making without any science.
Sure.
And so, how do we do it? Do we draw a line? How do we?
Well, you do it
Chris, how do you do
independently, you do it independently.
But you said it
Commissioner,
independently.
Well, if you you have
we
computers
don't
of a bipartisan, you have computers of a bipartisan commission.
Yeah, we gotta do it that way, and by the way, just for the record, that's what Ferguson.
There was a bill in the legislature this year to do it, it didn't.
Oh, and
It
look,
passed,
the
it
prop-
passed, but it got,
It got vetoed, and they couldn't override it.
They didn't take the motion.
Wasn't there a motion?
Let's not forget that Ferguson, Missouri is a result of gerrymandering. But, that's how Ferguson got.
Well, St. Louis has got that crazy.
That's the reason why they did it.
Well, the
was
city's so small, you don't, so let me ask this question. That brings up a great question, Kristen, is what about the fact that you have somewhat liberal annexation
Yeah.
laws in Nebraska, and in St. Louis you don't?
Well, the reason why they did it is to gerrymander the black vote out to get them out of the vote so that they could, and then that just left them isolated with little communities, like there's about 3 or 4, 5 of them. And they're Ferguson and something else, and they're all predominantly black because they used to be so strong in the St. Louis vote. We should not forget in this discussion, try to clean this up, but that annexation can be
Really wants to hear
gerrymandering. Annexation for municipal elections can be gerrymandering.
It's pretty easy to annex under Nebraska law.
But having grown up in Kansas City, which is a similar situation to St. Louis, it's a nightmare down there. But the city is completely surrounded by small communities, and there's no tax base left in the city.
Yeah.
So their schools have deteriorated, their civic service, and it's a vibrant community, because everyone's still, I still say I'm from Kansas City. I grew up in Independence, Missouri. It's a suburb, but I'm from Kansas City. But Kansas City itself is not what it used to be. It's surrounded, and can't grow.
Yeah.
Let's end, because we got 1 minute left, so,
Folks from this side have been quiet.
Yeah.
those who have been quiet must speak. No. They're hopefully taking it in.
I have something to say.
Okay.
I do believe that we do need a prescriptive campaign that helps educate our voters on what their rights are. And enlisting some of the agencies that Rebecca mentioned would be a way to do it, to add some convenience. But I also think from a social economical perspective, we need to, as a state, look at flexible voting options. I understand that if somebody moves, you have to re-register, but somebody that is being kicked out of their apartment and doesn't have the access to do that, we need to be, as a community, flexible and giving them the opportunity to vote regardless of whether they are registered. So is there something that we can do?
And with the homeless
to look at that?
population, especially
Exactly.
women who are really, through no fault of their own, are not in their residence.
But that's one of the things that I teach the classes on deputy registrars. And one of the things I always push is anyone who doesn't have a permanent address can use our office to register, or they can use any
Oh,
of
really?
the settlement houses
We
to
do that in
register.
Sarpy County.
And they can have
That's
a
good
different
work.
address where they would like their mail sent, like if they go to a particular church, they could have their ballots or their voting information sent to those, but that's one thing we have addressed just.
To Rebecca's point, though, that word, that word needs to get out.
Yes.
So, I mean, and that takes money, to your point.
Well, that's what I'm saying, at the end of the day, why don't we resource government to be the vehicle that does this? This shouldn't fall to 501c3s, this shouldn't fall to universities to be doing the work of government.
Yes.
Government needs to step up and fully fund and appropriate the resources so that we can have this.
When you renew
process.
your driver's license, there's the voting thing too, right?
Right.
That's a checkbox that,
Right.
and they're supposed to ask the
Right,
person who registered.
right, do you want to have you already
Yeah.
registered to vote? Or
I do say supposed to ask.
But
Right.
that's what, every
That's-
10 years, every?
Yeah, no, I'm not saying that, I'm just trying to catalog what we do.
And the online voting has helped quite a bit as well,
Yeah.
which has
Well, is there any way to
been
use
just under a year.
technology somehow? I mean, when we talk about the young voters not turning out to the poll, they're all about, these millennials are all about
Yeah.
technology.
And I
Is there a
vote
way
by
we
my
can
phone.
invest technology to vote, using an app or something? I know that'd be hard to identify people, but there's gotta be a way that we need to break through some of these barriers where we're not seeing it right now.
And we've seen some really interesting things at ES&S, but we see the issue with, yeah, it may work in Douglas County, but there's times where you can download a sample ballot, go ahead and pick it, you walk up, it's a QR code, it automatically loads it, but that's a voting machine. And we use paper ballots, but then we also have the issue of, in western Nebraska, there is a huge access issue to internet and broadband, which is something we may need to operate these systems. Like electronic poll books, which automatically check people across the whole state, we need access to internet and we need an investment in broadband in our western communities to be able to do that statewide. So there are some, like, outside of just the government, there are some realistic issues about our state that we're gonna have to come to grips with.
I think as many options we provide
Yeah.
people the ability, they'll give them the ability to be accessible to
Right.
voting, anything to.
Yeah, government should not be limiting access.
It's just those events that we need more
Yeah.
money.
Well, thank you. I mean, I think the message here is anything we can do to increase the opportunity for people who have the right to vote. And it takes a lot of work, and it takes work on all levels. I will say that everybody in this room does a lot to help that. And again, to my friends in the election commissioner's offices, I think you do amazing work. And all the elections I've run in, I've always had respect, and it's amazing how quickly you get results out. And then you are reaching out to the community, and that makes a big difference. And the league, what can you say? I mean, the League of Women Voters is, you've been there for a long time, doing a lot of good work. So,
26 years.
yep, that's a long time. And Preston, Benjamin, thanks for all you do and all the nonprofits. Thanks for coming. I don't know if we solved anything, but I think we have. I've listened.
Did you take notes?
How did you do that? Did you have your thing on?
Yeah.
You can share records.
Yeah, basically, like, the League of Women Voters, like, just type like that.
Thanks a lot, guys.
Thank you.
It's a committee that probably needs to get together every now and then.
Yes.